What I realized is that since I was 16 years old, I've been hiding something, and that something is not devious or sad or traumatic. I've been hiding my belief system. I didn't share my belief system with people because to most people, borders science fiction. My mom has a younger brother, and I think when I was in third grade, he was talking about astral projection, and it was the first time I ever heard that. Years later, as I got into high school, I'd go to the school library and try to find books on astral projection or out of body or things like this, and I was talking to a friend of mine in class, apparently too loud, and I mentioned astral projection and maybe even crop circles, just random teenage mystery things. I don't remember his name, but he said, you know, if you're actually really interested in these topics, my mom is involved in a group that talks about these things and more. They meet and they have classes and stuff like that. He said, maybe you'd be interested in that. And he gave me the information. And basically what it was is Don Weldon ran a center called Creative Guidelines. It was a teaching center that helped people use their subconscious mind to change their habits. Some people came through that center at his house that was converted. The bedrooms were classrooms and the garage was a meeting room and there was a bookstore in the living room, and it was utterly dedicated to teaching. And he was an older guy when I met him, and maybe in his late 50s or 60s. I don't know, as a teenager, everybody looked old. Some people would just come in to quit smoking or something like that because he was a hypnotist, but he thought that the best form of hypnosis was self-hypnosis, where you are learning how to create your own suggestions for yourself and rewire yourself with better habit. And I didn't know all that going into it, and I was just a teenager under 18, and so my mom's like, where are you going? What are you doing? I'm coming with you. And it was an orientation class where he just talked about what the center is, and there was maybe 6 or 8 other people there. And my mom, church lady at the time, she was very upset and very like, oh, these are the dark arts, something like this. And I was like, well, I kind of liked it. My mom didn't, and I was just like, well, I'm going to do it. You know, I'm going to sign up for this class. And I guess it was a couple $100, and somehow I got that together, or Don gave me a discount. Who knows? But I certainly was the youngest person there, at least that I came to see. I brought some other friends of mine, but here's what it was. He had a series of classes that began with self-hypnosis, self-awareness, self-confidence, and each class built upon itself. And then there was other classes that became more and more sort of metaphysically esoteric, if that's correct. I mean, it got into things about your teachers and guides, about your dream, about astral projection, about time travel, all these juicy titles of these classes, ultra-dimensional awareness. I just used to be teased by the titles. I'm like, oh, if I take a time travel class, does that mean I'll time travel? For me, no. Sadly, but it did mean that just these things were talked about reincarnation, things of that nature, how past life influenced now, and how you're never alone. There's always spiritual guides and entities around you. It was beginning to build a construct of the universe that made sense to me. This heaven and hell stuff, the moral of the story in the Bible, other religions that I had sort of glanced on weren't connecting the dots the way that I thought needed to be connected. So something began to feel right to me. And I started reading books about metaphysics. And it wasn't like saying, this book is about metaphysics. No, they were Paulo, what's his last name?
Paulo Coelho.
Yeah, okay.
Coelho.
Okay. And just other authors who wrote about spiritual journeys. It wasn't always put in the woo-woo metaphysical, let me see your aura, your chakras are spinning or they're not spinning. As much as I was curious about that, that was not Don's way. I think he had tremendous psychic powers, but he didn't present them. He refused to give readings. He thought a psychic reading interferes with your free will, that it becomes too much of a suggestion. If a teacher or a mentor gives you a reading, it carries too much weight, and you don't shape your own future. I, of course, as a teenager, was always looking for the candy of the miracle. You know, show me something so I can believe it. Only a few times was that presented, but the rest of the time, my spiritual ego was disappointed that I wasn't seeing miracles in this guy's garage, right? I needed to believe in something, but basically, after reading so many of these books and in the classes, I no longer needed the candy to say this is intriguing, this is meaningful to me, this is something that I want to pursue. I no longer asked him to prove it because it just started making sense to me. I liked the way that I was allowed to connect the dots. He didn't force any dots on me or any thoughts. He just had this way of saying things that made sense. And fortunately, I saved for 38 years all the literature from that organization. And I've built one website called weeklychanneling.com. And I say that because it's an invitation. It's a very nicely organized website that has the recordings of these Wednesday night channeled messages. Now, if you're familiar with channeling, it's more common today. People will talk about it. You can see Ramtha or some other, I don't know their names, but channeling didn't used to be known. I think channeling used to be like witchcraft. Really, it's letting go. Anyways, he used to do this every Wednesday. And as we became more familiar with Don Weldon's story and creative guidelines, it created a foundation of why he was doing things and how he began to feel secure enough to become a channel.
You kind of cut off on channeling, and you were on the topic, and I was, as your listener, I was anticipating to hear on your opinion of channeling for you. Cut off, and I'm like, okay, now I need to go Google.
So before I move ahead, this is very telling. So that was Steven, and he's on our team, and he walked in to grab some lunch. But I feel so vulnerable talking about this stuff. Like I said, I've kept it quiet because I've projected my fears of being judged. You know, look at me, I'm a pretty straight up vanilla guy, business guy, art guy, right? So these other things that were never comfortable for me to talk about, I still feel sensitive about it, to the point that I saw him come in and I was just like, I can't flow this. I self-edit. So apparently it's not quite on the surface yet. Okay, so the website weeklychanneling.com consists of hundreds of audio recordings of Don speaking into the microphone, giving channeled messages from other entities. To me, the basic sense of channeling is being in a calm, meditative state that allows you to listen to what some would call your inner voice, but at some point there's another voice. It's not like hearing voices in the insane asylum. There's just impressions. It's better explained as a musician that when someone is composing, they can write the notes and put this together, or there's parts they heard music in a dream. Well, was that music not real? They heard it in their dream. And what, did that music come from their mind, or did that music come from somewhere else? And some people, when they wake up, can put this down. You've even seen kids be asked to play something and they just right away they can compose around a few notes. In my mind, that's one definition of channeling, and it's through their particular skill set, or their particular interest, or their particular life pattern. Don, when he was young, started using the Ouija board and decided that wasn't the clearest way to get messages. It also wasn't the fastest way to get messages. So I don't remember the particular way he got started, but fast forward many years, what I witnessed Don when he would channel is he would do a writing in the morning, sort of like, oh, what am I feeling today? You know, the impressions of something's hanging in the atmosphere here. And he would always read that at the beginning of the channeling, and then he would sit. We were in the garage and there was maybe 6 or 8 people at the most, and he would just sit in his chair. He had this old school microphone, a tape recorder going in the back, and he would read the message, and then he would just go, and then it would start always the same. He would say, good evening, my beloved ones, things like this. And then he would go into the message. It would introduce, this is Gdan. Gdan or Eloa were the ones who were in charge of overseeing the safety of the message, that there wasn't any prankster spirits or things like this. His messages were always about love. They were not necessarily fortune-telling messages. The interesting thing that I experienced when I was in that circle on Wednesday nights is they gave us the opportunity, and I say they because I didn't even think of it as Don, and there's something that shifted in that room that was very distinctly not his normal personality. It came through his vocabulary, and he said there was times he channeled in other languages. He channeled in Chinese one time, he said, but it hurt his throat. And he said that for him, channeling through his vocabulary made the most sense. Now, what had to happen for a channel to be successful, from the metaphysical perspective, there is a vibratory rate. We all have a vibratory rate right now. And in the physical, no matter kind of how special your understanding is, you're in the physical, so it automatically lowers the vibration. And the messages were coming from a non-physical place. So there was this gap of non-physical message, physical channel, Don, energy of the other people in the room. And he would always say, it's not just you that are in the room physically here. He would always say the balconies are full. He said, you just can't see it. He said, because the light from this group, he said, on other dimensions is visible. He says, it's like a beacon. And so other people without this understanding, other entities, would be drawn to the light in the same way we are to a fireplace. I thought it was a beautiful metaphor, and I just felt comfortable being in a room where other people, other entities and spirits were lending their energy. The channeling happened best when our vibration contributed to his channeled message. And he had taught all of his students early on the art of sending divine love. We'll upload the flyer? What do you call it? It was one of the most important tools I've ever used in my life to solve problems, to help soothe depression, family issues, just life. It was something that I felt like, in the same way that money can solve a lot of problems if you're cold, it can put food on the table, it was actually this etherical abundance that somehow could permeate my being, others' beings, without being intrusive and seemed to be not relevant to time. I'll talk about divine love in another moment. This is about channeling. So we would sort of harmonize ourselves in the room, and he would say, lend our love and light to the channeled message so that their frequency could come down. Even on a radio, in the old days, you used to turn a dial, and you'd have to get the dial just on the right place to get the best reception. And then if you go just a little bit off, it would be staticky. And that's kind of how he explained it too. Lending our energy was like enhancing the antenna. So these messages they were wild. I mean, this is where people will either drop in or drop out. You know, he channeled, Gdan would speak often, and sometimes he'd say, after Gdan would speak, he'd say, oh, I've invited another guest, this is so-and-so. And many times they were master teachers, but they wouldn't provide a name, and they explained why. They're like, you would identify me with histories, perceptions of that. He said, I just want you to hear this message. Other times he would channel, you can either come in or go out. He would channel Jesus, he would channel disciples, he would channel other entities. And these recordings are all there for you to decide on that website. There's nothing for sale on that website. It's something that I've wanted to do for decades and finally had the resources to begin this. But the messages, regardless of if they came from an identified personality, so to speak, and sometimes they'd be so vague and people would say, like, is this a male energy or female energy? And they'd be like, it's both. It's everything. We were desperate to identify in an earthly lineup. Who's speaking? I must understand. And after a while, I stopped needing to determine who was speaking. Were they well known? Were they credible or not? And I just listened to the message, and I decided, even if this message is just coming from Don, I'm good with it, because what's being said and what I'm receiving is really important to me. Somehow I feel better when I hear this. That experience was shared with other people in the room, to the point where the channeling would last for about an hour, and they would ask, is there any questions? Not personal questions, but questions about the topic or questions about something that's going on. We all hesitated to ask questions. You would think someone gives you this gold card to ask a question about anything. What was happening in the room is that I would have a question and I would immediately have the answer, because I was a part of the channel, because I was a part of this energy that I could think something and then something would come to me. That by being present in that room, being present to that message, being in that vibration, somehow it was unlocking a little bit of myself. And we would talk about this all the time. Other people were like, well, I'm sorry we didn't ask any questions, but I kind of was getting this understanding. And there was a few people that asked questions and were very good about that. They're all on the tape. You'll hear them like characters, because they're the same people that stayed with the group for many years. And when I graduated high school, I left Arizona for Illinois. I went to art school. And I was so sad about leaving, because I was getting a foundation, what I felt, a spiritual family. And now it's like 10 minutes into it, I gotta go. And Don's like, go spread your wings, you know? And I'm like, oh, wings? Ooh. And what Don did is every week he sent me a little manila envelope with a tape cassette in it with a number on it. And that number was whatever week of channeling it was, 360, 340, 320, whatever. And so I had these messages that came in. And in Illinois, I tried to align with metaphysical groups, the School of Metaphysics, this, that, the other, and nothing measured up. I'd always felt like it was a curriculum, a business model. You do this, you do this, you do this. And it felt structured and corporately artificial. That doesn't mean that other people didn't have good experiences there. It just meant that it wasn't aligning to where I was. I was at a really good private school.
From all of the messages you received, is there one that stuck with you for life? The one you really remember, a message that was channeled to you?
Not in that way, and here's why. The messages were all about love, all about why we're here, what we're doing in our bodies here, what this life experience is about. It just was about expressions of universal law. So it wasn't any one particular story. These were concepts repeated again and again from different perspectives, from different angles, and through slightly different vocabulary. And I realized that that was the message. It was a continuous message of this is how things work. And it wasn't loud. There wasn't any cheerleading. There wasn't any band singing music. We weren't having prayers of recital. This was just for 1 hour on Wednesday night. When I moved to Illinois and I was receiving those taped packets, I became pretty disillusioned fast. I got swallowed up into the Chicago and surviving here and trying to make it in art school. He kept sending the tapes and I didn't listen to them, but I saved them. It was like there was just some energy of that package that I would get from a faraway place. It was like a pressed flower from a book from I don't know, someone that I loved. And without listening to the tape, there was a part of me that felt guilty for not listening to the tapes because I knew there was treasures inside. And there was another part of me that's like saying, I'm just not ready for those messages. I'm having too damn hard time here myself. And even to this day, I don't think I've heard all the messages. There's hundreds of these tapes. But this was my introduction to metaphysics, and those principles that I was exposed to and began to integrate into myself became very guiding principles for me moving forward in my business, moving forward in my relationships, moving forward in many different ways. And in so many ways, it was freeing my thinking, but I was allowing it to limit my life. And you just saw today an expression of that. My dad was a psychiatrist, lots of rules about how the brain works. My mom was a church lady who was always searching for Zen or some sort of spiritual expression to explain and define maybe sorrows that she had in her life. But there was no safe place for that type of thought. And so I began to hide it and just not talk about it, and I just let that be. And the way it restricted me is it restricted relationships, because I was very picky about who I would date, and I would kind of like talk myself out of it. I'm like, oh, this beautiful girl, she's so talented, this. And I'd have all these crushes. But because I projected that I wouldn't align in a spiritual way, it wasn't an elitist way. It was, gosh, I'm not going to be able to speak clearly here. I'm not going to be able to kind of expose that side of my vulnerability. So I had limited relationships that were very structurally good. I knew that I wasn't going to grow with that person at that time. You got to know that this was before any yoga movement. This was before internet. This was before there was almost church on TV, right? Maybe the 700 Club. So there was not a lot of dialogue about it going on. And I remember going to the library, and I was so desperate to even choose what books. I mean, I knew about Carlos Castaneda's and things like that, but I would go to the library and I'd just close my eyes and I would just grab a book and I'd take that book home and I'd read it. I don't know, I was desperate, hungry, and satisfied at the same time. I was always satisfied with the book that came off the shelf. I was always looking for more of a connection because I wanted answers right then. How do I cook this steak? How do I do this? How do I get rich? How do I become a better artist? Well, I got all those things, minus the cooking the steak, which I'm still terrible at, but they just came at a different timeline. And I decided, after offering 30 years to business, I think there's a better way for me to be a creative force, not creating from matter to matter, but creating from the quantum, creating from the spirit. And that's why I bought this building, to see if I can express that in the ways that are not hiding, but presenting. And that's the journey that I'm on. I feel tense talking about it, and yet I feel 38 years is a long time.
Do you have any kind of suggestion to younger generation who are right now as impatient for life as you were? Give me the knowledge how to make it fast. How do I climb up fast? You were telling the stories of before internet, before all the social media happened. How old were you? Then you moved to
art school at 19 or 20. And then there was nothing here. For me, a spiritual desert. And I soaked myself into art. I put all my attention into art school, and then I put all my attention into business.
So to those who are impatient about their life in their 20s, people tend to do a lot of mistakes while they're so impatient about it, and they want the result right now.
I think the best advice that comes to my mind, use the internet as a tool for information and satisfying curiosities. I mean, you can cook a steak on the internet, right? You got that. But the spiritual stuff is very hard to filter through. There's a lot of pre-filtered information that is maybe not as sound a foundation. So I think that once you take that in and you have those books and those things, it comes down to this. Just sitting still, without the phone, without the internet, and just breathing. Breathing is a mechanism that is more than just oxygen entering your bloodstream. There's something happening from another dimension that if you're upset, breathing is something that's good to do, and it's so easy to forget. You can see me on camera sometimes and Anna's in the background going, and I'm like, oh, I forgot, breathe. It's that simple. And I would say, whatever your form of meditation is, hopefully it can be as simple as just sitting still. Other people, it's drawing. Other people, it's art. There's many, many ways to meditate. And I think this light will begin to shine on the soil, But I was expecting that plant to grow really fast. And I'm like, well, what grows fast is weeds. Those flowers don't grow as fast, but the shit does. But that's the advice, because I think that journey begins to unfold for that person. It's not me that's going to help with that journey. I might be a catalyst. Somebody over here might be a catalyst. I had catalysts, but I didn't have an owl on my shoulder. It was being open to something coming through that was really good. Don always used to say, people would ask, well, how do I know if that is a message from God? And he said, well, if it's good, it's of God. If it's not, it's not. So listen to the love, that part. Some people will say, what is love? And I think there's different things that I've come to believe, that there's love that I have for my wife, for my animals, for nature. It's an ego love. It's transactional in some ways. It doesn't diminish how I feel about my wife, but I'm using it as a definition of, I could say, oh, I love this person because of how they treat me or how I feel around them or some sort of energetic exchange. I love this cat. Cats make me happy. I think stupid when I'm around cats. I love nature. Okay, there's things like this. And then there's another type of love that Don used to expressly talk about as divine love. And he said this is an actual multidimensional substance. This is a spiritual energy that is a thing that can change vibratory rates. He says, divine love is not about a marriage to somebody. He would say that's a contract. Divine love is a substance, and it's a substance that we can generate and magnify and utilize and direct and absorb and share. And he's like, that's a different thing. It's like the mechanism of prayer.
How do you filter information? For those who are interested in metaphysics, for those who are looking for information and they end up listening to you right now.
You're asking, how can someone who's just becoming interested in some sense of metaphysics be able to determine or filter or find good, reliable information and not be distracted with song and dance, fireworks, or horror? And my thought is that in any information that I seek, one of the quickest walkaway moments is when someone says, my way is the best way or the only way. That I move away from quickly, because I think there's as many ways as there are people. Each person has their own individual way towards enlightenment or God, or however you want to define that. I even learned that I was resistant to the word God. But the structural part I think I can contribute is there are some people that I listen to that I find very helpful, and I already filtered through a lot of misdirection and sleight of hand, and I'll be glad to present those people that I think have very strong voices. And my thought is that will lead to something else. And then that person's own curiosity and own openness will begin to attract or align other people, whether they be friends, family, people on the internet, books at the library, that they'll somehow find their way to you when you're open. And I would also say, don't look for the magic. I mean, you can have entertainment, but spiritual entertainment is kind of a different thing. A lot of people want to be spiritually entertained. There's horror stories, there's hardship, there's miracles, people inside of whales, people riding whales. I don't know. It's fascinating storytelling. And whether it's real or not, I don't know that that's where I want to anchor my center of growth. I found that my spiritual story has been pretty steadily boring. I'm not on a path with a cane in a robe. It's not romantic, As a guy that was struggling, lonely, couldn't meet girls, I'm the opposite of thinking that if my spirituality defined my lifestyle. That bothered me for a long time, because I thought, I have good thoughts, I have good beliefs. Why am I not able to make a dime? Why does spiritual understanding have to be with poverty? Well, it doesn't. But if I was creating matter from matter, that's a longer time. It starts with being open, and it starts with being centered. And I've been both closed and uncentered at different times in my life. And I think that what's happening here is it's a time of recentering for me. You and I are at the same place. Even though at 16 I was back there, I put a lot of stuff in my backpack. It didn't open the backpack. I just had pieces, apparently the right pieces for me. I think how I blurred spirituality and business and expected them to be the same. That somehow, if I was wiser, I should be richer. And if I was richer, I should be wiser. It wasn't like that for me. Even though I'm uncomfortable talking about this, the sincerity of my journey is authentic, and that maybe just the normalness of that. Well, that's why I stayed quiet for so long. So maybe there's some words to be said about silence. Maybe my intuition was right to not share with all those people. But I know that once I found different people to talk to, it was very helpful,
Intuition is also a form of channeling, I would say, from my own experience. I always try to listen to my first thought. How does intuition speak to you throughout your life?
Well, I think that my experience with intuition has been, sometimes it's a whisper, sometimes it's a bit of a holler, and sometimes I'm not listening to either. And other times, if I'm in the flow, I'll catch the whisper. I'll say it this way. So the way to build intuition as a muscle is to continue to listen. That sounds redundant. Here's the example I have. If I have a creative art idea and I don't write it down because I think, I'm in the car, I'll catch it later. And then I get home and I have the idea again and I don't write it down because I go have dinner. And then I forget the idea. And then the next day I have some more ideas and I don't write it down. Rinse and repeat that concept of not listening. Eventually, the creative voice inside of me is like, well, why do I give him ideas? He doesn't listen anyways. So I've turned off the spigot. And I think just the opposite can happen, that intuition can come stronger and stronger through just being open and interested in a particular topic. I started listening to Alan Watts. I didn't even know about Alan Watts. He's fun to listen to. That's like spiritual entertainment. But I realized the internet is not the right place for solid research because it's full of soundbite and things are out of context. And I get 5 minutes of this guy when actually it was a 2-hour lecture. And I'm like, I don't have 2 hours. And what I've done is I've turned over my power to whoever put that video on the internet to say to me, this is the most important 5 minutes of that 2 hours. And I'm like, well, why did I just give that away? Why didn't I dig a little deeper? And when I'm creating art, I get more creative. It's got to be like a musician. When they're singing, their voice gets better. These are all really good ideas that I haven't been putting into practice because you're looking at a guy who's been out of practice, which I think is the perfect time to talk about it, because so many times I would look at someone with a spiritual understanding and I'd be like, you're already freaking there, like, check. I'm a walking reminder. If you want it not to take 38 years, maybe listen to the tapes from a wise entity, right? So there's many ways, and I'm just coming back to them as being a part of my practice. And I think what it is allowing just my own confidence to be okay with it. I'm sound in my spiritual beliefs. It's not that I doubted those things, but I did restrict the flow. It's kind of like having dial-up when I could have had fiber optic. To be continued, Spiritual Thoughts, episode 600 lifetimes. 601. We'll come back to it.